Personally, or from a company perspective? Both. Okay. No, I think I personally obviously would love to see a modern, an update with modern vehicles. Now, nobody's naive enough to understand that doing that, you face a whole new set of challenges. From my perspective, it's not quite so easy for me to find the blueprints for a Challenger 2 as it is, for a Sherman, for example. So it does bring all those new challenges, and obviously gameplay, we're now talking, a total change. We have the database needs to be massive, the fields need to be massive, the maneuverability is quicker, the firepower is longer. We have to implement. We've got thermal imaging systems. We have to implement night. We have to implement blah blah blah. The list is endless, and it would never resemble that. I certainly understand why because the company is always synonymous with this period in time, and always has been. But Wargaming is expanding. Wargaming is developing. So never say never. And obviously with Masters of Orion, it's the company are sort of like. So sublime to the ridiculous, really, there, isn't it? But nobody's yet asked me to do an inside the Starship video or something. So, I mean, you're obviously aware that some of the work we've done with certain organisations with the tank side of life. So it just seems a natural progression to do a very similar sort of things from a naval perspective. As I said, for Europe, certainly the first one we're going to start working with will be the Polish Naval Museum with the museum ship that I can never ever pronounce and I always get told off to. So yeah, it will be very, very similar. We'd like to do it. As I said, I'm proud to say that we do give back a bit as well. I always think that it's nice to be able to, it's a successful company, and they've made a living out of promoting history and a war, and let's face it, one of the worst times that humanity has ever seen. So why not give a bit back to it as well? So that's nice for me. It's nice. Well, I think quite fortunately, and I'll be honest again, I don't think I'd have ever worked on a game that we are lucky from the point of view as and obviously Victor and his team were very canny that there is no gratuitous violence in any of the games. We don't see dead bodies, or we're not first-person shooters and all the rest of it. This made it. And I don't want to hide the fact, because ultimately we're all grown-ups, so we know that ultimately everything we're dealing with here was designed for one singular purpose, and that was to kill other people. There is no other purpose for any of it. But I think the way it's done is, with this promotion of history. So, of course there were concerns. When we're talking about, battle modes, and when we're doing articles about, I don't know, the Battle of Kursk or something, or it's all, it's big stuff. So there are always these. It's always incredibly hard, and probably one of the hardest parts for me for working for Europe is the differences between cultures between everybody. I think we have the American side of the business. I think is quite fortunate because the Americans are Americans, and it's all yeehaw. For us, obviously in Europe, we've got to temper the fact that we're now dealing with the Polish and the Germans and the Czechoslovakians and the Brits and all the rest of it as well. So it's quite hard. Little things like, I don't know, the swastikas and this sort of thing on vehicles we can't show. So it was all these sort of implications as well. There are a lot more things we've always thought about pushing the boundary. And I'm not talking so much perhaps from the gameplay, but from the promotional aspects, from the portal articles we write and this sort of thing as well, about going into perhaps different areas, and it's always this big discussion about at what stage. I'd like to. I mean, I personally am one for feeling that history, you should never hide anything of history. History is history is history. The good, the bad, and the indifferent of it. So, but again, of course, we have to appreciate this massive European community. What's going to appeal to the Germans? I use the Germans, probably a bad example. But what's going to appeal to the Germans will not appeal to the Polish community and Vicky Verky and this sort of thing. So there's a lot of discussion that goes on about that sort of thing. And one of the hardest things we had over the last few years was probably a charity. We had to identify a charity. And I don't think anybody else wanted to do this. Said, Richard, can you find us a charity for Europe? The Americans were doing the sort of American veterans type thing. We want to do something similar in Europe. We find us a veterans. I said, well, this is impossible. We're Europe. Who do we support in Europe? What veterans do we support? Do we support German veterans, Polish veterans, Czech veterans, Spanish veterans, British veterans? We cannot do it. So we're going to have to find something that's is right for everybody in Europe. which is why, to be fair, we went down the, I don't know if you know, but we sponsor and sort of support War Child, if you've heard of it or not. But luckily it was an organisation which I'd come across in Iraq, and I thought, well, this is great. This is something for, this is about the fallout and the repercussions of war. We're not talking about veterans, etc., etc. I mean, we still got a hard time. There's still much of the community that said, well, why aren't you doing veterans funds and this? I said, well, this is supporting, children who have suffered as a result of this. So, it was quite a thing that did to my heart. Again, I've gone so much off your initial question. Unbelievable. I'm sorry. Yeah, we do still find. To be fair, it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened so much in the past, and usually it only happens on funnily enough, the sort of Russian side of life and that sort of thing, for whatever reason. But you do sometimes come across documentation that is restricted or classified, or some of it's been marked as secret, etc., etc. So, as I said, it's really the organisation. I mean, it's a bad example. I don't want to pick on them, but for Kubinka, I don't know if you know, the Russian Tank Museum is still very much, and I think it's just more a cultural thing than anything else. It's all this, it needs to remain hidden. Which, let's face it, we're not talking about the latest, drone or, I don't know, satellite surveillance system or anything that's going to make, we're talking about, a vehicle that's 40, 50, 60 years old. But you still come across sometimes, tidbits which they don't really want to release or don't want us to release or to be privy to. Yeah, no, I mean, it's still early days. There's an awful lot, as you can see, there's an awful lot to still be done. And obviously we need to get the Royal Navy in there as well. So there's still an awful lot of work to be done and an awful lot of information to be gathered. It's going to be an ongoing process, very much like World of Tanks was. A little bit more straightforward from my side, from the research point of view, because I've got this. It's almost more structured than the tanks ever were. You've not got these hybrids, these Sherman turrets on AMX chassis and all these thousands of different variants. It's a bit more structured with ships, obviously, and the reference material is a bit more handy. So the next thing will be improving the gameplay. It's early days. As I say, the feedback we've had this early stage has been really, really positive. And what we determined to do on the World of Warships is we're not going to release anything or any ship in game until we're entirely happy that it's right. We sometimes the most we ever get involved with those is they send us the scripts, and we're sort of, because sometimes is a bit lost in translation, shall we say? So somebody like, what does that say? And that's where we come into it. But no, they're good videos. I really enjoyed them. Yeah, they do a lot of work on the video side of life. But it's something, as a company, we need to get together a bit more. We've got so much great content, but it seems to be split all over the place at the moment. So it'd be nice to get it all in one place and in every language. As I said, it's still not very much an ongoing thing from what's going to be in and what's not going to be in. I think you could safely say that obviously there are a lot less ships than there are tanks, than there were tanks. So as long as we can get the information, as long as we can get the enough stuff for the developers to make it, what we don't want to have is to have a situation where you're putting something into game for the sake of putting something into game. And I don't think the players or the community want that either. So it's just going to be a long task. As I said, I mean, it's on average about 7 months for one ship to be put into game, which is a lot of time. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of people. And ultimately, obviously, it's a lot of revenue to be investing. So, lessons learned. We want to make sure it goes right. No, you never had too much money. No, you never had too much money. The European side of it is always, from a video perspective, because we translate into so many different languages. Now, this is all very well and good. I said, and translation is translation. However, translation is not translation when you're talking, the mechanics of a ship or the nuts and bolts of a tank. So, we have a translation agency that works for us for Europe. But obviously, how do you translate, I don't know, a sprocket bolt or a breech block or, it's all very technical stuff when you're trying to translate. And in the early days, we had so many problems about, how do you translate this? Because, don't worry, we're all experts in translation. I'm sure you are, but, not in technical terms for a tank or something. It's the joys of the European side. It makes life a bit more complicated, a bit more problematic, but more interesting as well, of course.